Hello, I'm Alan Capper, South South News. We get our images and visions of countries and cities, regions, locations, largely from television and film. What are they like in reality? Who gives us these images? Who selects what we see and what we hear about countries and locations? We're lucky to have with us today Roberto Mitrotti, who is the founder and the CEO of RPM Media, which is a television production company which has, amongst other things, the largest selection of travel videos to be found on the internet. Roberto has also produced a television series for CBS called The Compulsive Traveler, which in fact is what you are. You are the compulsive traveler.
Thank you. Yes.
So how did this start? Why travel? How did it come to you that this was something you would spend your life doing?
Well, I always had an interest in travel. I mean, I always traveled since I was young, but then it became, I sort of combined the pleasure of travel with the business of travel, because I started pitching some ideas to some tourist boards, and they loved them. You know, I wanted to really go and explore, and today it's very difficult to explore and find something different. So I created this television show, which I pitched to CBS, and basically it was really finding things that were different. You know, whatever, they were thematic, great romantic spots, great adventure spots. So we weren't bound by any specific guideline except 8-minute stories in a country. So sure. That gave me the impetus to go in and dig and dig further. And that's why also my travel footage and my travel interest are really pretty wide, because as I was doing these flattering pieces for the country, you know, for the shows, I was also looking at the impact of tourism. I was looking at the other side of any story. You know, what's really going on? What's happening with the local populations? What's happening with the indigenous populations? What's happening with the monies that come into the country? Where do they end up, and so on and so forth?
Yeah, so, because they are more important stories.
Of course. So all of a sudden, I was doing stories that had a tourism promotion angle, and then I was doing other stories that were a little deeper. And of course, I didn't have a venue for television, for national television for that, so I created CompulsiveTravelerTV, because that was the web. And on the web, you can basically do anything, you know. So I went and started taking some of the footage that I had during my trips and started putting these stories out. And the stories traveled because people took them and put them on their sites. You know, basically, it's the web is really a free for all, so it was a way of distributing them and spreading the word out there. Bloggers picked them up, and so the site grew in, you know, because of the hook of every story. You know, the stories were different. They explored issues that had to do with ecology, with the poverty, with education.
Well, what do you look for? You go into a country. I imagine that you already have a predisposed view of what your main shoot is going to be, but how do you get beneath the surface? What are the issues?
Well, basically, I do my research. When I go into a country, I'm not going to follow just the book. So that's also going to be part of the story, because tourism is about bringing people to the country and showing the best possible aspect of a country. But also do my research on the problems and issues. And when I do that, I find things that somehow ask questions, and questions lead to other questions. For instance, when I've been going down to St. Vincent for a very long time, doing a lot of stories, underwater and above water. And I found out that once a year, St. Vincentians are allowed to kill a whale. So I managed to make a trip to coincide my trip with the killing of the whale. But I wanted to find out what was the story behind the killing of the whale. And that led to actually the discovery that the Japanese government or certain governmental organizations had financed the building of a market, which is called Little Tokyo, and they gave the little market, the Tokyo market, to the Vincentians, who were very, very poor, in order to get a vote with the whaling commission and so on and so forth.
And to get whale meat in the restaurant.
Whale meat, which is very prized in Tokyo.
So that was a disappointment that you saw the ulterior motive.
Yeah, and now of course there is a story, which is the story of the killing of the whale, which is basically the glory of the old whaling days, which luckily are no longer around, but the Vincentians somehow managed to maintain a symbolic killing of a whale a year, which is enough, more than enough. But they all partake, they all eat the whale, they all, it's basically like a communion. So it's really almost a religious ceremony for them. So it's part of it has become part of their consciousness and their culture. Right. But that was sort of, the market, it sort of came into the picture, and that was part of the exploitation of that ritual.
Right, that's one example of something that rather took you by surprise.
Yes.
But let me ask you, in a general sense, you're visiting a large number of the developing nations. You are familiar with United Nations development goals. One of the most important is sustainable development in these countries. Do you see that? Do you see this happening? Do you see change? And do you see tourism as part of the drive for sustainable development?
Well, I see tourism as a double-edged sword. Tourism somehow, the way it's conducted by certain countries is very positive, because you see right away how it sort of filters through the various levels of society down to the lower rung of society.
With employment and
so on and so forth. Yeah, that's the biggest. Every dollar that comes in feeds the food. It goes down into the food chain. Which is wonderful. At the same time, the impact of tourism on certain sites, like the Galapagos, for instance, which are so fragile, yes. Or Machu Picchu, in Peru, or even the Mexican sites, all the Mayan sites. I see so many people. Until 2 years ago, 2-3 years ago, people were allowed to climb the pyramids. Now, imagine millions of people climbing the pyramids. The stones are being, those stones have been around for 1,000 years. But imagine now the modern jumbo jets that unload thousands and thousands of people on these constructions, which were built for that. Now the wear and tear is obvious and apparent, and so all of that needs to be controlled. But of course, the tourism brings revenues, and even though, for instance, Chichen Itza is owned by a private family, which pays a percentage to the Mexican government. That shouldn't be. That's a patrimony of the world. It's patrimony of the Mexican people. Why should a private family own and benefit from that? They're not doing anything for the local population. For the moment you step out of Chichen Itza, you see the poor villages and the people, eking a living by selling, oranges by the side of the street. So, that is what bothers me. Seeing the yes, everybody. I'm a capitalist too, like everybody else. But we are, because we live in the capitalist world. But we have to understand. Also, I have a conscience.
The cost.
And make sure that everybody gets a fair share.
In your travels, what do you observe about the changing role of women in these developing societies, where traditionally the women's role has been completely subordinate? Do you see change coming in?
Absolutely. I mean, I was very surprised to walk into the Library of Alexandria, which was built on the site of the mythical Library of Alexandria. And I walked in, and this is a modern building, beautiful, beyond what you would expect in Alexandria of Egypt. The place was packed with women in Arab dress, reading magazines, reading books, reading in English, So even though Egypt has had its problems, here you see certain changes that are really, really dramatic. And so I feel that women in the world are beginning to really, it's unavoidable. I was once in Indonesia, and I went on the island of, I went on a little island next to Bali. Indonesia is all Muslim. And I was looking around, and I went into a little store that were selling little art crafts, and in the back, through an open door, I saw 2, 3 women lying on pillows, and children, and they were watching an American program
on TV.
On TV,
yeah.
Now that exposure, this little, they probably never traveled outside of the island. They probably never even went to Jakarta, but they were watching American television, and it didn't matter. It could have been European television, but they were watching certain things that were happening outside of their, and all that is imbibed. Children are watching it. They pick it up. I mean, the Tahrir Square revolution, it's been breathed in through the web and television and everything else, And I did a program years ago for RPM Media called Rock Revolutions, based on the premise that rock and roll brought down the Berlin Wall. And I spent 2 hours interviewing famous musicians to prove my point.
Well, now I can see the argument for that.
Yeah.
But let me ask you something. I think you made a program about the World Heritage Sites, which the United Nations had some involvement with through Ted Turner. Was that right?
Yes. In fact, this was a few years back. I was involved. I got a telephone call from the World Heritage Site Foundation, and they were actually very impressed already with our programs on television. They said we wanted to go mainstream. We wanted to bring the World Heritage Sites idea out to the world in the form of television programming, and we put it together. The proposal that it never really got off the ground because of funding, because it was a CBS national program. But what happened after that? I made sure that wherever I traveled, I always filmed the World Heritage Sites, because those are the spots that...
Well, what are some of the heritage sites?
Well, sometimes some of them are entire cities, like San Gimignano in Italy, but others are the pyramid, the Angkor Wats in Cambodia. Right. They are cultural and geographical sites.
You're traveling all the time. Which countries, it would be impossible, I'm sure, for you to say, oh, that's my favorite country, but which are the countries that you enjoy the most, that you would go back tomorrow if you were asked to, if there was an assignment to film there?
2 places. India, which I think is an amazing country, which luckily is being modernized, and so it has a lot of the advantages of the developing world. In a very nice way, and yet it's got so much ancient history and so much cultural diversity that it blows your mind wherever you are. And Cambodia, because Cambodia has been sort of cut off from the rest of the world. It had a terrifying experience with the Khmer Rouge, and yet it has a charm, and it's got the people are magnificent, and they're trying so hard to reconnect with the culture that was destroyed. That also is heartbreaking. I just did a story on the Apsara dances, which are old royal dances, and which were actually obliterated during the Khmer Rouge. A woman is getting all these orphans to live with her, when they become 3, 4, and training them into to become dancers. And they're very complicated dancers, very stylized and so on and so forth. And she's living on nothing, and she gets no support from anybody except donations. And she's doing a fantastic job. And you'll see a video on you can see a video on Compulsive Traveler. So Cambodia is fresh. It's fresh. You know, and I think that it's also developing. If they're doing the right thing, it will develop in the right way. You know, in a way that is sort of a good blend of new and old.
You must have witnessed some rather frightening examples of climate change in the filming you've been doing. Can you give us an example or two of where you've seen change over some years in countries or places that you've known, say, over a decade?
Well, what's interesting is I went to film Lake Nakuru in Kenya. Now, Lake Nakuru is one of the great, it's a World Heritage Site. 1.5 million flamingos used to be there. And actually, they feed on the algae which grow because of a chemical reaction and so on and so forth. So they love the place. The runoff from industries that are around the area on the edges of Nakuru, and also industries, overpopulation, you know, no proper sewers and so on and so forth, has killed so many flamingos. Now they're saying that the population is possibly 1/4 of that. That also is a disaster. I mean, I've seen school children going there to watch the flamingos, you know, and together with tourists.
While they're still there.
While they're still there. But it might not be, you know, and by the way, the UN has a project, has initiated a project to somehow repair that damage. We don't know whether it's going to happen or not. You know, pink flamingos were famous in Egyptian times. They were in hieroglyphs, you know, in the pyramids.
My favorite bird. This is very, very sad and depressing.
And it's very sad. And you know, I was in the Himalayas. I was doing a documentary on Tibetan refugees in Spiti Valley, and I took a ride, whitewater rafting with a bunch of nuns. The spray, you know, it's amazing. The spray of, we had some pretty dangerous bends. Water came into the boat. The nuns swallowed the water. They got sick from the pollution. And we're talking about the Ganges up close to the Himalayas. So we're talking about climate change and pollution, and in the most unexpected places, you know.
Absolutely.
So they're really serious problems, you know.
Where are you off to next?
Morocco.
And what are you doing there?
I'm doing the north. Last year I did the south and the desert. Now I'm doing Tangiers in the Mediterranean part, and probably some stories around Meknes and the wine countries. Apparently, this is interesting. The colonialism was not all terrible, you know. If it knew when to pull back, and the French did. Apparently they built great wineries, and the Moroccans took the wineries and turned them into a big industry, and so now they export them all over Europe. So I'm doing a story about the wineries, you know, the old French wineries, and now are Moroccan, and they're all around the Meknes area. Right. So it should be interesting.
Well, I hope it's a very good trip. Roberto Mitrotti,
thank you,
founder and CEO of RPM Media and the Compulsive Traveler. Thank you very much for being
You're
with
welcome.
us.
It was a pleasure.
And we look for it. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure for us.
Okay.
Alan Kappa, South News.